Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca,
And I'm Landon.
and we have some absolutely wonderful and amazing guests with us today on Mormonish. We have Rachael and Elizabeth. How are you today?
Perfect. We're good. Happy
And
to
and
be
and they're
here.
good because they're coming from a remote location, New Zealand. This is probably the furthest call we've had, I think.
I think it is. Yeah, we can see out your window in your background, and it just looks beautiful. We are all jealous already right away.
That's right. It's summer
It's
for you
beautiful.
while it's snowing here.
That's
So
yeah. If I were to open my window, yeah, we're looking at snow slush rain and everything. So no, we're just so excited that we were able to find a time where we both, we're in different time zones across the world that we're able to meet. And I'll tell our viewers and listeners. So we often on Mormonish we will get emails from people that like to share their story, and we absolutely love that. And we got an email from Elizabeth and Rachael, just kind of touching on their story. And as Landon and I read it, we just thought this story, this is amazing. And we would love for our viewers and listeners to be able to meet them and to hear more about it. So we had a phone call and just had tons of fun talking. And we were like, okay, they're coming on the show. Do you have anything to add to that, Landon?
no, I got the email. I woke up to go to the gym in the morning, and of course, the time zone difference they'd written during the night, and I was driving, and I started reading her email as I before I left, and I couldn't stop reading it. I was
While you were
driving,
driving.
reading the email, and I'm going, "Oh my
Oh
gosh,
no.
I can't stop reading this." So then I had to call Rebecca like as soon as I figured she'd be awake, and I'm like, "Did you see the email?" This is a cool story. So yeah, it's a really neat story. I was really excited by it, and we wanted to share it with our listeners.
Yep, that is it. So thank you so much for reaching out. I know sometimes it takes courage to do that, just to send a random email, but I will tell all our viewers and listeners we love that because we just love to hear where you are at and things that are meaningful to you. And this is going to be one of those shows where I think we're going to learn a lot, and it's going to be wonderful. So I think maybe we'll start out. Let's just start out with Elizabeth and just tell us a little bit about who you are and your background, and then Rachael, and then we'll kind of get into the whole story together.
Okay. So, I'm Elizabeth. I was raised in the church in a very Orthodox family in the 1970s and 80s, which um, was a time fairly unique in Mormonism. I feel like there were so many things
Mhm.
that you were involved with the church and Mormonism at that time. But it was Mormon, my Mormon upbringing was a very big part of my early life. I had a very happy young childhood. I felt confident. I made friends easily. I um, felt like I did well in school and sports and just felt confident about who I was, and also I had the gospel. So, I felt extra blessed, like really special because I had the truth and I was taught Mormon doctrine and things from a very early age. Um and I loved my upbringing until I got probably about age probably late junior high, maybe 13, 14, and high school. And then I started to feel kind of uncomfortable. I felt uncomfortable in my own skin a little bit. I had good friends. I um, I connected well with girls, um, but I was uncomfortable with boys and liking boys, and that was an age when all my friends were really boy crazy, and they were always talking about boys, and I just wasn't into it, and I felt uncomfortable. Um, I had a good family. There's a few unique things about my childhood. Um, both my parents were converts, and the church really provided something that each of them needed in their lives. My mom felt very isolated as a child. She was an only child, didn't feel really validated by her parents. And then she met someone in high school who introduced her to the church, and it gave her this community and acceptance. And she really felt a part of it, and she embraced it and believed the Joseph Smith story and just really embraced it. And then my dad, his family had a lot of chaos. His dad was an alcoholic, and the church brought him the structure and safety in the word of wisdom. And so they met at BYU. They got engaged 2 weeks after meeting. They got married 6 weeks later.
Oh my
So
gosh.
they got married. They're like that classic
On steroids, right?
classic Mormon courtship on steroids. Yes. But the thing that really united them, they were honestly a poor match, but the thing that really united them was the gospel. And so the church. And so, we were a very church oriented family. We went to church every week. We had family home evening. We read scriptures. And, at that time, I think there was a lot of focus on like, these are the last days and kind of prepping. And so we always had a big...
You even had a Lamanite placement student in your family. Isn't that correct?
Yes, we did. Yes. And that was a big thing in that time too, was the Lamanite placement program.
Boy, that is the typical Mormon upbringing, even to bringing a Lamanite child into your home. My goodness. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's see. Other quirky things about my childhood. I'm a physician.
Yes.
Which is odd considering my upbringing, because we never went to the doctor. The first line of treatment for something was a blessing. And luckily most things do get better on their own, but the second line was, my dad would go to Mexico because we lived in California. He would go down to Mexico, and you can just buy antibiotics and things over the counter. So, he'd buy penicillin or whatever and just be like, oh, you don't feel well? Here's some penicillin.
You weren't allergic.
But one thing that stands out from kind of our Mormon belief and upbringing was when my dad was very involved in missionary work. He was always the mission leader. But he mentored kind of a newer convert and kind of became friends with him and mentored him over several years. And they actually followed us from Idaho to California. And so in California, I was probably 12, and he gets a call from this friend who's married, and his wife is having an episode or something. And I get told by my dad that he's going over to cast out, that this woman is possessed with an evil spirit, and he is going to cast out the devils that have possessed her body. And it turns out she had been running around naked in the complex and was just having a psychotic episode, which I didn't have that verbiage or anything at the time. I just knew she wasn't right. And I was told she was possessed by devils, and he was going to go over and, in the name of Jesus Christ, command them to leave, and that it was going to be okay. And I was scared and confused by that episode. And, when I got older and went to college, I realized, she probably was having a psychotic break and, maybe a manic episode or something, and really needed psychiatric help. But, he went over and they cast out demons, and then I don't know what they did from there, or whether, the police came, or I don't know what happened, but
yeah, I feel like when I learn more of your story, reading your email and talk to you, I feel like we were raised in a very similar way, because my parents I didn't even take an aspirin until I went to college. We did not have, we did not do that. And I got a headache my first freshman year at BYU, and someone said, well, here, toss me a bottle of aspirin. I'm like, what is this? And I mean, you take an aspirin, your headache goes away. I mean, that sounds crazy. I was 18 years old, but in my family, we did not do that. We also had the same kind of scenario where if there's a mental health issue, it's a prayer, or even a physical issue, it's a prayer first, unless it's very extreme. And I think that's not so uncommon. I had to laugh when you wrote in the email that you were pretty sure that Nancy Drew and Laura Ingalls Wilder were also members of the church. My two favorite stacks of books growing up. I feel like we're kind of kindred spirits on that, similar era, similar.
That's what made me call. I'm like, you've got to read this. She thinks the same thing as you do.
That's right. Rebecca will love this. Yeah. No, I reread the entire Laura Ingalls Wilder series, cover to cover, every year. I still do. So.
I love that.
And I have to say that being on Mormonish Podcast gives me the chance to sort of be a Nancy Drew. We sometimes do episodes where we do a little.
Oh yes, you totally have.
Yeah, it is. Fun. So yeah, I felt kind of bonded to you in your email, which was great. So
yeah,
no, and so fascinating.
I loved to read growing up.
Yeah, and then just how you discussed, just like you said, just dating or interactions and your feelings on that. It was just a little different, perhaps, from maybe what other people were experiencing, or you kind of mentioned that you felt perhaps different, but didn't really understand why, or.
Yeah. I felt uncomfortable, but I really didn't understand why. And I felt uncomfortable dating. I wanted to continue to fit in with my friends, and they were interested in boys, and I wanted to be validated by boys too. So I would have a crush on someone and think that I liked them. But then if they liked me back, and then I wasn't interested anymore. Or sometimes we would date for a little while, and then I would feel really uncomfortable. I didn't want to be near them. Every little thing they did would bug me. And so I would break up.
Wow.
And I didn't understand why or what that discomfort was. I always thought I was normal, quote, normal. So I didn't understand why I felt uncomfortable. And some of it, I think I thought, maybe I'm uncomfortable because I'm a Mormon. My friends aren't Mormon, and I have to keep myself separate.
Yeah, for sure.
I have to keep myself as an example, or I have to keep myself, quote, virtuous. So I'm not comfortable being around boys. So I never got into boy trouble. It was really easy never to get into boy trouble. I would like boys. I had boyfriends, but after a month or so, I didn't want to be around them anymore. I would break up with them. I actually had friends get mad at me because I was dating this boy who, he was going to go to the Naval Academy. He was captain of the football team. He was a good-looking guy. He was very smart. And, he liked me, and we got together, and then I just, I just didn't want to be with him anymore. So I broke up with him, and my friends were really annoyed with me. Like, do you think you're too good? And I really didn't. I just didn't feel comfortable. But I didn't understand why.
Yeah, I like how you described, I can't remember if it was your phone call or email, where you didn't know what made people just go crazy and break the law of chastity. You couldn't understand it. You were like, what's the big deal? Why would anyone be that out of control? You just, at that point,
I'm a good girl.
With guys. You did not understand why that was, and I love that.
Coming from
feel that way.
Coming from Montana and Idaho, and that kind of cloistered type community, did you even realize there was an option in your sexuality, or?
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Growing up, I didn't know anyone who was gay. I really didn't. I didn't think I did. I'm sure I did, but I didn't think that I knew anybody who was gay. And, we moved to California when I was about 10 or 11. And even there, this was in the early 80s. We moved to California in 1980. And, I didn't even know, I didn't really even know gay existed at that time. I didn't know that that was even a thing. And then as I started to get older, I heard kind of peripherally about gay people, and in the mid-late 80s was HIV and AIDS. And so there was that and a lot of negative talk about, well, this is a perversion that's being punished by God. So it didn't even seem like an option. And I was a kind of quote, I felt a quote normal, girl. True, I was a tomboy growing up. I never played with dolls. I loved the outdoors, climbing trees and exploring and things like that. But that to me just meant tomboy, and that did not equate with anything else.
Yeah.
I was very, very naive sexually, period. And so, of course, I was going to marry a man. Of course, I would date boys. There wasn't even an option. And then as I got a little bit older, late teens, I knew there were lesbians, but they were like butch, mullet wearing,
stereotype,
muscular women. And that's not me. I was a cheerleader in high school, for Pete's sake. So there's no reason that I could even comprehend the thought of being gay myself. So I didn't understand why I felt uncomfortable in my skin. And I didn't understand that it was just mainly discomfort with being with a guy. I just, something didn't feel right. And it led to some depression at the time and self-doubt, because I didn't know why I felt this discomfort and dysphoria that I felt at that time. And that kind of continued. I went to BYU. I always made girlfriends quickly, girls that I could talk to and relate to. But I just still felt this discomfort in my own skin. And I think looking back, it makes sense to me why. But at the time it really didn't, and I didn't understand. I dated a lot at BYU. So I went to BYU. I dated a lot, and just never felt right about any of the relationships, and so they were all very short-lived.
Right. And of course, the message that you're getting from the church is that you're going to find a man and you're going to have a family. I mean,
Right.
there was no other option, especially in that era. We're similar eras. I mean, that is what you're going to do. You are going to get married. You're going to find a man.
Right.
You're going to have a family. And everyone around you is also has that same trajectory. Like everybody is going to get married. Everyone's going to do it.
And
So
that's what I wanted.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
what I wanted.
yes.
I wanted that, and I wanted to have kids, and I wanted to be a mom, and I wanted to find this relationship that would be everything that I wanted it to be, with connection and love. And but I never could find that with a male. But I didn't understand that at the time. I
Right.
thought maybe I just haven't met the right male or something.
But then
So
you did get married. It happened.
it did happen.
Yeah.
So my third year at BYU, I met Brad, and we met at a bonfire dance at BYU, and he got my number and called me right away. And so I was like, oh, okay, I'll go on a date with this guy. And he's a super nice guy, easy to talk to. He liked to read. He liked music. We had similar interests. He was intelligent. And so I had a nice time. And also, he was quite shy with girls. He hadn't been with very many girls. So he didn't make any moves quickly at all. So we
Which was
just
fine
started
for
out,
you.
which was great. Which was
It
great.
was perfect.
So yeah, so we like drove to Heber one day and went to Granny's and got ice cream and just chatted and had a nice time. And then he dropped me off, and then he kept calling, and then we dated for a month or two, and then a few moves were made, and I kind of felt uncomfortable, but he was a returned missionary, and he had a testimony, and we
He
got
checked
along
all
and
the
could talk.
boxes.
You checked
He
all the
checked
boxes.
all
Yeah.
the boxes, and plus I liked him as a person,
Yes.
but I couldn't ever feel like that real connection. So I actually broke up with him several times in our dating process. So we dated for over a year before we got married, and I broke up with him a couple of times during that time because I still just felt uncomfortable about something. But then logically, I could tell myself, of course he's the right person. He meets all the check boxes that you want, and he's a good person, and you get along and can talk about things. And so one day I really prayed about it because I knew he wanted to marry me. So I really prayed about it. And after praying, I felt just this peace, like everything is going to be okay. And so I thought, okay, well, there's my answer. This is the person that I am supposed to marry. And so then, we got engaged and went ahead with things. But sometimes that just uncomfortable feeling or that doubt of, oh, I don't know. But I would always go back to, well, you prayed about it and you felt peace. So you can let that uncomfortable feeling go because you felt peace about it at that time that you prayed about it. And so it's going to be okay, and you can get married. And so I did.
Isn't that
And
funny how you do that to yourself, you know? And probably the piece was, oh, I'm in my third year at BYU. I got to wrap this up. You know, I mean, there are things that
Gotta
there are
close the deal.
well, I have friends who were married and, and
Yeah.
honestly, I was worried because I had never really connected with anyone. And I thought, I might end up like an old maid. Like, this is a good
Yeah, because I'm
person.
21. Yeah,
I'm
exactly. You might be.
21.
Well, and he sounds like an amazing, wonderful person that, like you said, you loved as a person. That's the thing. And so, of course, this
Right.
is a great
And
option for you.
absolutely. And we're married 30 years and I still feel that way.
Yeah.
He's a really good person. And he is still someone that I can talk to and I have respect for. But I'm not straight.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that at the time. And so I just wasn't able to connect with him in a meaningful whole way.
Yeah.
And I think I think I could even gaslight myself at the time to say, well, that doesn't matter. It's not just about sex, which it isn't.
Mhm.
But I'd say, well, you don't, as long as you respect that person, you can be married to them.
Well, we were all taught that by the
Yes.
church, that if two
Yes.
people love the
Yep.
Lord and put the gospel in their lives, that they can be happy together and that they'll thrive by loving the Lord. And
You're supposed to be in a threesome with Jesus. That's
Yeah.
what we're told over and over. As long as there's that third person there, the threesome with Jesus, you will be fine. And I
The
know
problem
people
is Jesus is male also.
exactly.
Really doesn't
you had a
work
real
for
problem.
a lesbian.
No, that's it. No, and this story. So oh my gosh, we're just loving this so much. So let's hear a little bit about Rachel's story, and then together, let's tell what happened.
So I grew up in Montana. Paint the picture. A little kid on a Hot Wheels. We got a new Hot Wheels every summer, beginning of the summer, without our shirt on the entire summer. And by the end of the summer, the seat just broke off and it becomes a scooter. That was my childhood. Hands down, I was outside playing in the dirt, playing sports. The neighborhood kids, we all got along. One kid got some boxing gloves one summer, and so we took up boxing that summer. And I didn't wear a shirt until my body told me I had to.
There it is. There it is. Even in Montana, eventually your body tells you have to wear a shirt. I've learned something today.
Well, that's because summers are so short in Montana. That's only a couple days, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very short time period. That's true. I grew up, I was the epitome of tomboy, I think. I had a lot of neighborhood friends. We played every sport. We loved hanging out with each other. They didn't care that I was this girl that didn't wear a shirt around, and I was just one of the guys, basically. And it wasn't until I was old enough to know that a girl should be wearing a shirt. And I was at the pool, and some girls walked in from school, and I realized that I felt uncomfortable and embarrassed that I wasn't living up to this expectation that society has put on me. And, my family, surprisingly, I don't remember them ever getting mad at me for being this tomboy running around. And my mom she was very supportive. She never really made a big deal out of it, which I think was important for me at the time. I think that if I had a family that criticized me and started judging me at a young age, that I should act a certain way, I think I would have had a lot more problems. But it wasn't a big deal to my neighborhood friends, my family, that I was this person.
And were you LDS? Were you LDS?
I did grow up LDS, kind of. My dad was a convert from, he was born in Indonesia, a family from a Dutch family. So he went back and forth between the Netherlands and Indonesia. He was in the Netherlands during World War II. I was the second youngest of 8 children, so my parents were older. He was a convert. The missionaries found him in the Netherlands, and then he moved to Canada, and then eventually to Ogden, and found my mom. So once he came to the United States.
Yeah, that explains why they didn't care if you ran around without a shirt, because by the 8th kid, you don't give a damn.
Yes.
Yeah, they're like, please leave, you're annoying me.
No, but to be so, I don't know, open and not judgmental as a Mormon family, that's pretty unique, that they were just like, she's going to do her own thing. She's a free spirit, and let her go. That's wonderful.
And that was like age 10, 11 even.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, my family, I was dressed garment ready since I was a baby. I've never worn a sundress. I was garment ready even as a toddler. You wore sleeves and you wore, so there are different kinds of Mormon families.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, no, my dad, when he moved to the United States, he always said that the translation of the church from Dutch to English didn't make sense to him. And so he kind of stopped living. He didn't really believe in the church. In fact, there's a lot of, a whole nother story about my dad that I have, but me going to church was rebelling against him in a way. So I did that. And
say that kind of proudly.
Like, oh yeah, Mom and Dad, I'm going to sacrament meeting, and I'm staying.
I'll go
late.
to church. I'll show you.
I'll show him.
I'm going to go to all my meetings. Take that.
There's so much truth to that. You really don't know. My brother would get it, but yeah. So I went to church, but we didn't have like family home evening. We didn't have scripture study. I took what I believed, what felt good to me, and held it tight. And then other things I was not interested in. I didn't care about. Honestly, the Joseph Smith story was never really something that I grabbed onto. And I was just like, oh, he was probably some mentally ill person that was smart and was able to write.
Oh, you saw that early on. How interesting.
She was way smarter than
How
me.
astute.
But it's interesting as far as the church, like the things that I held tight. My mom taught me to pray at a young age, and that's something that I still feel a connection with. And my mom passed away in 2020, and so there's this communication, and I don't know who it's with, but I still feel that connection. That's something that my mom taught me at a young age, and so I held on to that. But I grew up in, when I say my body told me I needed to wear a shirt, I meant that literally. Like I needed to, I started getting into high school and junior high, and started to really society telling me you need to act a certain way because you are a girl. And I became really shy. I just kind of sat in the background. I felt so comfortable as a kid being this person who was adventurous and could be myself, talking with everyone, to going into high school very shy, kind of sitting in the background, just watching what I should wear, what I should say, how I should act. And I became very, very uncomfortable. And really shy. And it wasn't until I was close to my senior year and a lady came back from college and visited our young women's, and she said, when you go off to college, no one knows you, so you can become who you want to be. And I was really intrigued by that statement because I wanted to be someone who could communicate to people, who felt comfortable. And so I decided that, like, it was the summer after my senior year, that I wanted to be able to start to talk to people and feel comfortable. I went on a trip. I was invited to a volleyball trip to Australia. And so during that trip, no one knew me. except for one girl that I went to elementary school with. And I just decided to be myself. I ended up talking a lot and feeling comfortable with the people I was with. And in fact, one person asked me towards the end of the trip, like, what were you like in high school? And I said, oh, I was super shy. And she's like, yeah, I don't believe you. And the other girl was like, yeah, she was really shy. So I that kind of opened me up a little bit and pushed me, you know, as I went into college, when I felt like I could be a more adventurous and kind of put myself out there a little bit more. I didn't date a lot. I did have crushes on both boys and girls during high school. But it definitely was not something, you know, again, growing up in Montana in the 80s, 70s, 80s, it's not an option. And so I didn't really understand that. I know someone asked me or said something about me being gay, and I was just like, what? No, that's not real.
Yeah.
And so I kind of denied it the entire time, but it was in the back of my mind. As I went off to college, I started dating a little bit more. I really, about mid-20 ish, you know, I'm going to be turning 21. I really wanted to serve a mission. I thought it would be amazing to, you know, serve. And I didn't really understand the scriptures or like lessons I would teach, but I was really intrigued by just serving people. And so I was going to go on a mission. That's what I started preparing for. And so I moved to Utah from Montana and got a job and started working to save money to go on this mission. And then I met my future husband. And that year-ish of dating was an interesting time for me, because here I wanted to really go on a mission, but then there was this pressure of, well, you're almost 21, you need to get married.
And that's back in the day when they encouraged women not to go on a mission.
Right.
Your first priority was to get married.
Correct.
The second priority was the mission. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. In fact, my home bishop from Montana contacted me. So my mom must have said something. I don't know if my mom really pushed me to get married though, but he did contact me and he did say, well, you being a mother will be a mission, or something like that. Some term like that.
That was the
said
line.
all the time. That was the priority. The mission would happen if you, for some reason, didn't get married. I mean, I faced the same pressure. I was engaged for a really long time at BYU, like 7 years. I know, that's a story on its own. Met someone my freshman year all the way through graduate school, did not end up marrying them. But it kept me from, you know, I didn't go on a mission. I was in this engagement, right? So I didn't even get married till I was a month away from being 26. Can you imagine the pressure on that? No, I mean, I know. So 21, all of that. You'll never understand this, Landon, this pressure that women feel at BYU. So, of course, you become a menace when you're 25, right? According to Brittany. So there's a different kind of pressure on men. So, but yeah, I fully believe that your leaders, you know, everybody behind your back is going, we've got to get her to understand her priority, and that's marriage and motherhood. Absolutely.
If she has kids, there's 3 to 5 missionaries that you're sending out as opposed to one if you go out. So that's the thinking. So
right. Yeah. And I think I was always searching for something, and I didn't know what it was. I daydreamed a lot as a kid. I looked for this connection. I loved talking to people. About, it doesn't have to be about anything really. My mom would get sick of me because I would talk all the time. But I was always searching for this connection, and I never really found that. And so I would daydream. And I got married, and I loved being a mother. Like I really enjoyed my kids. trying to raise them. I'm very conflicted now by the whole, my whole attitude with the church was, well, it's not bad. Like there's these things that I get to teach my kids, and if it's not true, that's why I kept telling people, if it's not true, it's not bad. Like it's not hurting things. But I think now looking back a little bit, I really pressured my kids and tried to guide their conversations, their thoughts to what I thought they should believe versus listening to them and really trying to learn who they were. And I've talked to each of them now, but so there's this conflict between this is what I thought was good, and now that was actually really harmful. And so it's something that I fight with myself a lot about. But I loved being a mother.
Are your children in the church, both of you, or is it a mix? Or
my kids are probably half are in, half are out. So
what about your kids, Elizabeth?
My children have all left the church, and they all left the church before I did. My oldest son was the first to leave the church, and it was he kind of had a faith crisis during his mission. He went to Virginia and started finding out about some of church history, and then really wanted to defend it, and so started really reading in order to be a defender of the church. And he asked us to mail him the Joseph Smith papers, and I'm like, wow, my son is so studious. And so I sent him all of that. I hadn't read it. That's a lot of reading. And I was busy, but yeah, he had a faith crisis, and he was the first to leave the church. And then, subsequently, all of my children left the church. And my leaving was kind of gradual through all of that. But then at a certain point, I learned all of those things as well, and left.
So far, we've got a pretty normal story here of, two women who followed the path. They got married. They've got
normal women,
children. Yeah. What happened from there?
And what happened? Yeah.
This is where the story gets interesting. And Elizabeth, you got married and then you went on to medical school, I'm assuming.
I did. Yeah. So, which wasn't really my goal. I got a patriarchal blessing though, that then told me I was going to have this prominent career and that I was going to get a lot of education. And
that's very unusual.
So then what's that?
For an
very
LDS
unusual
woman.
for a woman's patriarchal blessing.
No, really,
seriously,
it was, but
unusual.
it really made me rethink like my whole life plan, because my life plan had been just to get married, not just to, but to get married and to have a lot of kids and be a stay-at-home mom. That was my life plan. Got this patriarchal blessing that just primarily talked about my career and what I was going to do there. And so then I started looking like, well, what am I supposed to do? And once I went to college, I really found that I loved anatomy and biology and how the human body worked. And I found I was good at science, which I didn't think I would be growing up. So yeah, then I got my degree and then started doing all the pre-med requirements. I got married to Brad. He was, I kind of ran it by him like, well, what do you think if I try to go to medical school? And he was very supportive and said, yeah, go for it. I'm all for it. And so I applied to medical school, got into medical school, had children along the way. I had one before medical school, one during medical school, one in residency, and then one after. So it was a very, very busy time. I was married, I was studying, I was being a mom. And then Brad was being a full-time dad through much of that. And so I didn't really have time. I got to a point where I just didn't have time to really question faith. I put my own feelings to the side because I was so worried about taking care of everyone else. I wanted to be a good mom. I wanted to be a good doctor. And then I wanted to be a good wife. And so I just put aside, what my own discomfort was. I kept too busy to really study and learn. And so then I'd been married 23 years, and this woman moves into my ward. She moved in on my birthday. I didn't know that at the time because I didn't know the date she moved in, but it turns out she moved in on my birthday. Great birthday present. And shortly after she moved in, a few women in our ward had decided to do a Ragnar together, and it was a trail Ragnar. And so I thought,
for those who aren't
really
familiar, for those who aren't familiar with the Ragnar, that's a race where that has a lot of legs and different
kind of tag team.
So you have a team and you go like 24 hours or something like that, and you're like in a van together doing that. So a lot of people outside of Utah may not know what a Ragnar is. So
yes, so ours was a trail Ragnar, and so there was actually kind of a home-based camp where you had your tent with your team, and then there were these loops that were on these mountain trails that your team each runner had to complete 2 loops, but you did it in sequence. So there were people running during the night and all for, over 24 hours. And so we both had decided to do it. And I remember at that time, I kind of knew Rachael a little bit because we had 2 daughters the same age. And I just was intrigued with her. So I was really excited that she was going to do this Ragnar. And I remember I was one of the drivers down, and then one of the other teammates said, "Oh, well, Rachel's going to drive with me. We're going to go a little later." And I just remember being really disappointed because there's something about Rachael. Does that sound like a movie?
We didn't even really meet yet. About we've seen each other, but that was about it.
Right.
We didn't spend any time together before that.
Yeah. So we went and did this Ragnar, and her cot was next to my cot. And we ended up the first night, she had jet lag from returning from Asia. And I was so intrigued with her. We ended up staying up all night the first night before the Ragnar was supposed to start, talking. Everyone else was asleep, and we just talked for hours and hours in the night. And I
would always pause, give you a chance to stop talking, because I was enjoying it, but I was like, okay, I might be talking too much. So I would pause and then you'd ask me another question. So I was like, all right.
But I felt this just immediate connection to her, and I just wanted to be around her all the time. So we did this Ragnar, and then after, I just started calling her up and saying, "Hey, do you want to go running today? Do you want to go for a run?" And she always said yes.
I think my exact words were "heck yes."
So
Mormon answer.
We ended up running together every day, and I really just felt this connection and this attraction to her that I didn't equate as a romantic attraction or a sexual attraction in any way, but I just was drawn to who she was. And the more I got to know her, the more I just really loved being around her and respected her and just wanted to talk to her all the time.
We spent many miles running and talking. I mean, it took a few months for me to catch up to you so we could talk and run at the same time. But we spent, like, that next year, I think we spent over 1,000 miles running together.
Mm-hmm. And we did that for 3 years, and we just really became the best of friends and inseparable. We would spend our Saturdays, we'd go for a run, and then we'd go grocery shopping together, and we'd do a Costco run together, and we would drag out the time that we spent together because we loved being together so much. And I started to recognize that I had feelings for Rachael that were more than friendship, but then I would repress that. I would say, that's ridiculous. She's just your friend. Like, that's ridiculous.
Did your families just think, oh, two good friends, and isn't it great that mom has a bestie, and isn't it great that my wife has someone to pal around? I mean, is that kind of how it was? Just not even thinking any other way? Yeah.
For me it was. And Brad actually became biking buddies with Kent, who was Rachael's ex-husband. So they became biking buddies, and they would go biking and we would go running.
Perfect.
And so Brad thought it was great and, didn't think anything about it. It wasn't as easy in Rachael's situation because it was time away from her spouse, which didn't go over very well. And so it was a little more difficult for her, but for me, it was pretty easy. And my family, she was so good to my kids too. And, that was junior high for one of my daughters who really had a tough time. And Rachael and my daughter just connected so well. And Rachael was so helpful to her in a way that I couldn't be. And so, she really just, nobody had a problem in my family with us spending time together. So we started spending a ton of time together, and then Rachael won a trip, or the opportunity to go on a trip with her work, New Skin, to Africa. And so her husband was going to go, she was planning on her husband going with her, and he ended up not really wanting to go. And, I really wanted to go, but I wasn't going to say anything. She could take it. She could take a +1, but she invited me to go, and
that was a great trip, and it was interesting for us. We spent 10 days together and
nonstop. Like, only time I didn't see you was if I went to the bathroom.
Like, we were together, and a lot of the other people were getting sick of their +1s, and we were like, we have to work in the different rooms.
I just felt such a connection and loved being with Rachael that trip was just such a wonderful trip. And I still didn't fully acknowledge that I had more than just a deep friendship with Rachael at that time. But once the trip was over, I just had what I call Rachael withdrawals. I was so sad not to be around her, and I just knew I just had this connection. And then I started thinking about, like, wow, like I feel for her more than I've ever felt for a friendship, or a friendship with a girl or a woman. before, or a male. The connection I have is deeper. And there's something about being with Rachael where I feel like my authentic self, and I feel so loved and accepted, and I feel so happy, safe and joyful. And so then when I couldn't be around her all the time, then I thought, what am I lacking in my own marriage relationship? What is it about this relationship? And also I would start feeling, when she would talk about Kent, I would start to feel kind of jealous. Like, he gets to spend every evening with her. And, it's kind of silly. And I look back at myself and think, oh my gosh, I'm jealous of this woman's husband, but I kind of was feeling that way. And it really made me question myself. And then I would shut it down because I was very busy, and I could compartmentalize and shut things down, my feelings. And so I did. I shut it down for a long time, but we would just spend time together. But this was always something there.
Right. I think with me, it was this, we keep talking about this connection, and we've still 10 years later talk about this connection that we still can't explain fully, because there's many ways to have a connection with somebody, but like the connection we had together was all realms, very fulfilling with everything. And that was, I talked about daydreaming. I would daydream a lot when I felt uncomfortable in my life. And I stopped daydreaming when I hung out with Elizabeth, which I thought was, I even mentioned that to her one time when we were running, like, I don't daydream anymore, which was so interesting to me because I was such this daydreamer of
Something
yearning
else.
for something else.
Right. So you were present.
And
you were able to be present in that relationship without even realizing it. And you guys mentioned that you were ministering. Were you ministering each other, or so? That to me is just so, oh my gosh. I love that part
I was
of it.
called to be, I think it's still called visiting teaching back then, maybe.
Yeah.
So I was her visiting teacher.
Oh,
and,
dear.
I really took that seriously, and I fulfilled my callings to the
Yes,
fullest.
you did.
Relief Society
Made
president
sure I
loved
checked
you.
on her every day.
still,
Yeah. So yeah, I was called to be her, and they probably did that because they knew we were friends, and
Right.
that got the numbers up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I took my calling seriously.
And how long did this go on? Just feeling a connection, but you're in your individual relationships and family, yet feeling missing something when you can't be together like you like to. How long does this exist between you two?
For
10 years?
several years.
Wow.
But during that time, I did start to recognize what I was feeling. And it did bring up a lot of self-doubt. And we did actually even kind of hint at it at times. And so I kind of knew that Rachael was feeling the same that I was. Because we would, there were just certain things, she would say to me sometimes, like, I think I love you more than I should. and I would say, I feel the same. You mean so much to me, and then, that was scary.
Right.
And what did that mean? We don't, we were really navigating this.
Sure.
It was new.
But it was several years. And we actually went on a second Africa trip. And on that second Africa trip, like, I just wanted to touch her all the time. Like, I just wanted to be near her. And, I would sleep next to her on the bed and I just touch her shoulder. Like, which is so interesting to me because the whole time I was married, I thought I didn't like to be touched. I would pull away. My husband reach over and I would kind of cower a little, and then I'd catch myself and go, don't do that. That's not nice. Yeah. Or he would say, you don't really like me, do you? And I'm like, no, of course I do. You're a wonderful person. And my kids later told me that they noticed that. But with Rachael, we ran this marathon together, and we laid down in the grass right when we passed through the finish line. And I just wanted to hold her hand in that moment. And so I did. Even though my brain was like, this is not an acceptable thing to do, I grabbed her hand and held her hand. And then she kind of was like, what do I do? And pulled her hand away. This was, just maybe 2 years into our friendship, a year and a half. But as things went on, I just wanted to be close to Rachael. And then it started to, when I would let it started to kind of make sense. And I realized that I had these feelings for her that I couldn't deny, but it was also very painful to have that realization. It was great in that I was feeling this love and connection with someone that I really had never had before, that I had always longed for. But then I also felt in my heart that was so wrong, that it wasn't the right thing to be feeling. It wasn't what God would want for me. It was shameful. I was married. I, had this family, and I was allowing myself to feel these feelings for someone that were so strong and meant so much to me. So it was very conflicted. It was a very hard time for me. How was that for you?
It was definitely confusing, because I know that I felt more myself around Elizabeth. I could talk. I could share my feelings without being criticized, and I was very comfortable. I wanted to be around her all the time, and so it was really confusing. Yes, there were hints, but we're still like not gonna just come out and say it. And it wasn't until really late into our friendship where I finally said something. I think about that ice cream social or something, where I was just like, oh, I really wanted to meet you at that point. And then she was like, me too.
But that was back like a month after you moved into the ward.
There was the ice cream social, yeah. So like there was this desire that we had to be together
the whole time.
And then, I would say, oh, I felt like this at this time. And she'd say, oh, I did too. And so it started to confirm my feelings a little bit. And that was helpful because, before that, I was just more confused, I think.
So eventually there has to be sort of a point of no return where you do say to each other things that then you cannot dial back, right? There has to be a point where you arrive at that after these years, and then decisions have to be made, paths forward have to be found. So
right.
Whew, that's
and that was about maybe 2019, 2020, where things had been kind of leading up to it, but really where I told Rachael, like, I'm feeling this, and I don't know how to process this. And then she said, I am too. And we were really able to kind of talk about it. And then that was a time a lot of changes happened in my life. I was scared by this. I didn't know what to do about it. And then I decided after 20 years in my job that I would quit that job and So I started looking at other job opportunities, and I started looking at locum tenens. I was confused with what to do. My oldest son had already left the church. There were certain things that really bothered me about the church, and I had this big shelf of things about the church. And I knew how I felt about Rachael, and I had told her how I felt about her, and she had told me that she felt the same. And we knew we had this connection and love for each other. So I quit my job. I came and did a locum tenens job in New Zealand. Just me and my youngest daughter, Lily, who was 18 and turning 19 at the time she came with me. And I used that time to kind of try and process, how do I move forward knowing this about myself? And I started understanding that I wasn't straight, that all of these experiences in my life made sense. Why I was never comfortable being married, why I wasn't comfortable dating in high school, and why I always felt more connection for women, and why I had this amazing love and attraction for Rachael. So I was trying to process that, and then how did that fit with my belief in the church? So I came to New Zealand to see, like, if I have space, is that going to help? And I decided at that time, I can't act upon this because I'm married. I've been married for 30 years, and we have a stable family, and my children love our family. And my youngest, who had difficulties in school, and she's a little neurodivergent and really struggled, but she would always say, I'm so grateful I have my parents and my family. My family's so strong, and they're so supportive, and they understand me. And I just felt like I was going to ruin my family if I acted on what I felt and what I knew about myself. And I did not want to ruin my family. I didn't want to, harm Brad. I didn't want to harm my children. So I decided while I was out here, I'm going to have to break off this connection or friendship, or learn how to just say, we'll keep this at a distance and a platonic friendship. So that's what I had decided when I came. And I'll let you tell yours in a second, but there's one more part. So Brad came out, he's a school teacher, so he'd come out in May, and then he and Lily and I were here, and then he and Lily went back in August, and I was coming back in September because he had to start teaching. So I was here for a month, and I was still just trying to figure it out. And, that's when Holland gave his famous Holland BYU talk about musket fire, and I was just so put off by that. I was a follower of Mormon and some gay Twitter, right? And so someone had posted this talk, and so I listened to it, and I just was so outraged by it. And I was so outraged that he would call out a student when he has this power differential. So on Twitter, then someone reposted Matt Easton's comment that, hey, that was me. And by the way, if you want to hear this speech I gave, or you want to see this speech I gave, I've connected a link. So I read his speech that he gave at graduation. And it was so sweet. And there was nothing bad about that. And yet he was called out by an apostle. And I just was so outraged by that. So then Matt Easton, I followed him. And then he went on Mormon Stories. And he said, no, I'm going to just tell my story on Mormon Stories. And so I had never listened to Mormon Stories or any post-Mormon anything, because I was still really a believer, despite, my son saying, what do you know about polyandry, Mom? What do you know about, I was
Famous
like,
last words.
stop. So anyways, so I listened to Matt Easton's story, and I was so moved by how hard he tried to ungay himself and to do everything right. And his story was heartbreaking to me. But anyways, I was listening to that, and I was on a run, and then it finished, and autoplay put on the next story, which was Jeremy Reynolds.
Oh dear.
And I didn't know anything about Jeremy Reynolds or the CES letter. So I was listening to the story, and it's a very sincere story too, about him serving his mission and then having questions and then researching and then really wanting to find answers, and his grandpa saying, write this person. So anyways, the story of the CES letter, I'm like, oh, well, what's the CES letter? So then I read the CES letter. I'm in New Zealand by myself, so I'm working Monday through Friday, and then I just have my evenings to myself and my weekends. And I read the CES letter, and then I was like, So then I started researching each of those items, and I wanted to be fair, so I listened to Fair Mormon replies, and then I really spent hours and hours and hours, and then I was like, I've been punked my whole life. I've been punked. This is not true. I believed in this thing that was not true, and I based my whole life on it. So that's how I kind of left. That's how I lost my faith in the church.
Did you worry what Rachael would think when you told her, or did you feel that she was also open-minded or questioning, or?
I did. But I knew I was safe saying whatever with Rachael. And also on runs, even early on, I'd say, well, tell me, do you have a testimony? Tell me about your testimony. Because I really did. And she was like, I don't really think I do. I think it's a good thing, but do I believe in Joseph Smith? Like, not really. And I was like, what? Like,
she did
be part of this religion and not believe? And I was full in, man. But she never really was. So I did tell her, but she was like, yeah, okay, well, she didn't feel this need to like research it all, because she wasn't fully in from the beginning. But for me, it was devastating. I felt like my whole world just fell apart. Everything I believed in, what I thought I knew all the answers. Growing up, I thought I knew the answers of what happens when you die, and everything. And to have my whole world just to realize that wasn't, that I didn't have the answers to everything, and that I didn't believe in Mormonism was shattering. And then at the same time, to realize that I wasn't even the sexual orientation that I thought that I was supposed to be, or that I initially thought that of course I was just so shattering. And thankfully I got a good therapist, and that helped. So what about you during that time? I've been talking too much.
Not at all. No, this is both of your stories. So we're so happy that you can tell them together.
Well, with my story, my ex-husband is a good person, but we definitely were not a match. And I tried like what I felt like I was trying throughout the marriage to find this connection. And so I wanted to leave, but I didn't feel like I had a good reason. Like with, feeling like in the church, you have to have a good reason to leave. And I also found a good therapist, thanks to Elizabeth.
I shared my therapist with her.
And helped me to realize that being true to myself and that it was okay to normalize that decision to leave. And so that was important to me. At the same time, I also had the same story with Elizabeth, and so it was very confusing for me. But yes, through great therapy, I guess we didn't even get to that part. The second.
Yeah. So I maybe I should tell a little bit more to catch up. So I came back from New Zealand. I'm still married and, feeling committed to stay in the marriage. I tell Brad, like, I've kind of learned some things about the church and, I kind of told him. So then he started researching and he was like, we're out. Like,
oh, wow.
And I know. So he left too. And he was more like done even than I was. And he goes to Thrive and he goes like, he's very post-Mormon, right?
Wow.
So we both were out and I had decided I was, gonna stay in the marriage, but as I did and realized what I was sacrificing and knowing that I wasn't straight, it became so unbearable. And that's not Brad's fault or anybody's fault. I couldn't be untrue to myself anymore. And I knew when I got married to Brad, it was very cerebral. He checks these boxes. He's a good person, but it wasn't from my heart and soul, this connection. And what I had with Rachael went against everything cerebral, but it was from my heart and soul. And my brain was saying, that's not safe or good to do because you're going to ruin all these people's lives. And, you're known in this community and everyone is just going to think that you've gone off your rocker and, that, you're crazy. And I did care what people thought. And I wanted so much for my family to be okay. So, but the more I tried to stay and deny kind of and suppress what I felt in my soul, the more depressed I became. And I just became really depressed and hopeless and felt like I wasn't being authentic. And so we went to Puerto Rico right before Christmas with my whole extended family. Not extended, but Brad, me, our children, and their significant others. We all went over to Puerto Rico and it was a family Christmas vacation and it was lovely, but I just felt so miserable. And it was my 30th anniversary while we were there and we were getting family photos that day. And, everyone's like, oh, happy anniversary. 30 is so great. And I just felt so sad and depressed. And I wanted to be happy for Brad and for my family, but I just couldn't. And so I smiled for all the photos. And then the photographer's like, okay, let's do one of you and Brad, take a picture together and kiss and look into each other's eyes. And and I know Brad felt it, but I couldn't do it. And I made it through the rest of the day and went back to our Airbnb, and everyone's playing cards and having fun. And I just went to bed and I just cried and cried. And I just couldn't stay in this marriage that I couldn't feel whole in, that I knew wasn't right for me. Even though Brad was a good person. And I really wanted to die, honestly, because I didn't want to ruin my family. I thought it'd be easier for them than me saying I'm gay. And, I just thought that would devastate everyone. And so I kept thinking, like, why can't I just die? I don't want to die by suicide because then that will hurt my kids, but can I just have a stroke tonight? Or like, so by the morning, I was still alive and I just knew that I wasn't going to be okay, that I wasn't going to be able to stay. And so I made that decision that no matter what Rachael was going to decide, I had to be true to myself, and I couldn't stay in a heterosexual marriage anymore. I couldn't do it. So I was set to come to New Zealand again a week later, and I left for New Zealand, and that time I went by myself. And I knew by then that I was going to leave Brad, and Rachael and I had talked, and we had decided we were going to be together, and we thought we might lose everyone in that process, but we knew we needed to be true to ourselves. And so we made that decision.
Yeah. We spent a lot of that time, both of us, going through therapy and being okay with that decision, because it's not an easy one. It's not easy for people involved, including ourselves. So we spent a lot of time not together in therapy, but separate. We both had a lot of things that we needed to work through. And so.
And we were taught by society and by Mormonism that as a woman, our responsibility is to make sure that everyone else is okay and to sacrifice ourselves for the well-being of everyone else. And that message was ingrained deeply in me without really realizing that me being okay can actually help my children be okay, and see that it's okay for them to be okay and not put aside what's true, what's real and authentic for them to please other people and please society.
And realizing you don't have control over other people's feelings and outcomes as much as you think you do. It's a great plan, but I think that we always thought, well, this person's going to react this way. And the therapist kept saying, how do you know that? And I would say, history has shown that they would act this way. She's like, no, you don't know that's true. And to learn that, and everyone surprised us, really.
So at what point did you tell your families?
That was my question. There's a moment then where you have to do that. Oh my goodness.
So I left before Elizabeth came home from New Zealand. And then I was still working through some different things. And then
but you didn't tell him.
I didn't tell him about us, like,
or that you weren't straight.
Right. That there were other reasons why I left. So I had that time to work with my relationship with my kids, and then Elizabeth and I, we still I mean, Elizabeth still had a decision to make too. I mean, I think she had made it, but I needed to give her that space to be able to make that decision on her own, and not, we didn't make it because of each other. Like, we both would have left probably without each other. But so, and then your story with.
So I was here in New Zealand again. And Brad was coming out. I was here by myself for a while. And during that time, I knew that I was going to leave and that I was going to tell him and my children. So it was a painful few months just going over in my head, like, how's everyone going to react? What's going to happen? So school got out, Brad came end of May. And the first day that he was here, I told him, and that was a really difficult, hard conversation. We'd been married for 30 years, and he knew something was wrong during that time I had been back, because I was so distant and depressed, and I just couldn't stand for him to even touch me. And I feel like once everything came to my consciousness, I couldn't pretend otherwise. Anyways, so he came, and I told him the first day, and it was really difficult, and I didn't know how he would react, if he would be angry with me or if he would want to leave. And so I had even made sure that there was like a hotel room if he needed it, and like he could go travel through New Zealand or do his own thing. But he decided, he said, no, I want to stay, and let's just spend this time together and talk about it. And so he stayed, and we spent about 6 weeks in New Zealand together, knowing this. And we had a lot of discussions and a lot of talk about, things. And he's like, it really makes sense to me. And he was really sweet. He'd say, that must have really been hard for you to feel that way. And he was really, really just compassionate. But also it hit him hard. He was depressed and trying to figure out, well, how am I going to move forward? And so, we went on some trips, and we hiked, and we talked a lot. And by the end, he had a Match account and a Bumble account, and we were scrolling through, and I'm like, no, not her. She's not the right one for you. And
oh my God.
And yeah, what do you think about her?
Wow.
And he'd say, well,
wow.
And but we were just friends by the end, and we were talking about how to move forward with our family, and looking up dates for him. And then we came home together, and it was up to me to tell my children. And oh man, that was just probably the hardest day of my whole life. Just the hardest thing, to gather my family. And we had a family dinner, everyone's fine, and then we were all sitting around chatting, and then it gets quiet, and Brad looks at me and is like, okay, here you go. And I started crying, and I told them, and was so afraid. And my oldest son, the one who had, I'm going to cry, sorry, I'm crying. My oldest son, who was the first to leave the church, and I probably didn't support him as well as I wish I had when he left. He came right over to me and put his arm around me and said, love you, Mom. It's all okay. And my kids were just so supportive and so sweet. And it just meant so much to me, because I had been so afraid for, such a long time of how this would impact them. And I think it was hard a little bit. My other son cried and was like, I just love our family. I love you and Dad. And I just hate to think of our family not being together. And I think since then, they've all seen that we are still all a family. And I think they've seen that my ex-husband is happier. He's with someone who loves him and can have a whole relationship with him that I couldn't. And so it was hard. It was so hard, but it worked out okay with my immediate family. So
we have a big loving family. It's just a different dynamic now.
Yeah.
Wow.
So you told your family, and then like disaster happened right after that. Is that at this time?
Yeah. So you got home like July 13th, something like that.
I told my family on the 18th or 17th, somewhere around there.
Right. And I was training for the New York Marathon at the time.
While I was gone.
Yeah, I had started training for the New York Marathon, and I couldn't get going. I just kept saying to myself, wow, you must be really lazy, because I just couldn't get my training going, and I was kind of depressed about it. And so I had a cough for about 3 years that I went into the doctors, and I was treated for asthma and nasal whatever.
Post-nasal drainage.
Yeah, and just different things. And so I felt like I had something stuck in my throat. So I went to an ear, nose, throat specialist and said, hey, there's something stuck in my throat. And they did a scan and didn't see anything. And so I asked the ear, nose, throat specialist to do for a CT scan. I said, can we just start at the end? I'm trying to train for this marathon. Let's just go to the
CT of your lungs.
Right. They did lungs and throat, I think, at this time. But and so this was just right when Elizabeth was coming home, and they called and said, oh, your throat CT scan's normal, but they're trying to pull the image up on your lung. And so they wouldn't give me an answer on that one. And I told the lady, I kept calling her back and just said, just tell me what the answer is. And she said, he's still trying to pull up the image. And I said, well, if it was normal, you would tell me. And so Elizabeth got home, and we decided to go to an urgent care and ask for the results, because no one was giving us the results. And so that was on the 20th of July.
So 2 days after I told my children, 1 week after I got back.
Right.
We went in and we just said, cut the crap, print the result. We're going to read through it. And it showed 2 masses in her right.
The story's the best, though. The lady brings the paper in. She starts to read it, and Elizabeth's like, nope, let me just see it. And she started reading it, and she read it to herself, and I could just see both of their faces. And so I already knew. But yeah, that was 2 masses that were found in my right lung. Which, of course, they were saying, well, we're not going to give it a name yet. They're not going to say.
I knew right when I read the CT scan that it was cancer. The way the radiologist had worded the findings, there were certain things like calling it spiculated. And I knew, as a physician, I know that means cancer. And so
I wasn't ready to accept it either. Like I was. So it could be something else.
So I knew she had cancer, and she had some hope still that she didn't, and I didn't want to dash that, but I knew she had cancer. And so we went to these appointments, kind of tried to expedite things, and she was diagnosed with lung cancer. So within a month, about a month and maybe 6 weeks of me being home and us coming out, a month of us coming out, she was at Huntsman getting chemotherapy.
So you guys have gone years to get to this point. And literally within days, you're like, I could possibly lose her after all of this. That had
No,
been
that's
devastating.
true. It was really a lot to take in, and for her too, to be like, I've finally gotten to this place in my life and I've done everything that I thought God wanted me to do, and then I finally get to this point and I'm diagnosed with cancer and I might die.
That was a hard conversation for my kids, I think, to hear that I had cancer. So they had this they were still trying to process a divorce and me coming out and now cancer.
Mhm.
But having cancer, you go through a lot of emotions. Like, I don't know, is there like grief steps or something? I think depression's in there. I think anger's in there. And I felt all of them, but I didn't necessarily like show that to everyone, just because I felt like everyone had already, taken care of everybody else's feelings. They'd already seen too many things, too many
Yeah.
She
changes.
felt like she traumatized everyone already,
Yeah.
and so didn't need to traumatize everybody again. But
yeah, it's an interesting journey for sure to have this other thing that you're working through. And I was so lucky to have Elizabeth there. She was in between jobs at the time, so I had her full time for a long time, and then I was on leave from work, so we were able to spend a lot of time together right at the very beginning.
If I don't know what I believe as far as God, and all my structure fell apart when I lost my faith in the gospel. But I would say I feel like there was a higher power looking out for us as far as timing. The way that everything worked out, the fact that I was home when she got the diagnosis, that we could work through this together, that I could be there for her and help her, be the one to help her through this horrendous surgery that she had. And through chemo and radiation, and it really brought us closer together. And I felt like we were so close before, but then when you are facing death and you're really thinking about what matters and your relationship and living each day intentionally, I really am so grateful that I was able to go through that with Rachael and help her through this hard time, and that we were able to use this time to grow closer together. I feel like the timing of all the things in our life and our relationship and the way it developed and how we were able to come out once our children were a little older and had, mine at least had left the church and were able to handle it better. I think I feel like there was a higher power. There's just a timing in the whole thing that just worked out so perfectly for us. And if I was still Mormon, I would attribute it to Mormon God and blessings, but Mormon God wouldn't have put me and Rachel together in the first place. So
No.
but it's been a journey, and cancer is hard. Chemo is hard. And part of chemo and radiation, people don't realize Rachael looks well. She didn't lose her hair with chemo for lung cancer. It's not like some other cancers where the chemo doesn't makes you lose your hair. And so, she felt unwell, but looked fine. And that's even a challenge. And
yeah, everyone says you look fine.
Like,
and
yeah,
that's
why aren't you
how do you
acting
react
like yourself?
to that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, that was difficult.
But she made it through the surgery, which we thought was going to remove everything. Then we got a blow in January when they came back with the pathology and said there were some positive lymph nodes outside of the area we took out, and there some infiltration into blood vessels. So now we want you to do chemo again, and we want you to do radiation, which she hadn't done. So she had to start over when we thought she was done. And that was a really devastating blow. And, you know, we've cried a lot of tears together and had a lot of fear. But she went through the chemo and radiation, and none of the scans have shown cancer since then. And she had some complications from radiation. She got post-radiation pneumonitis, and she's been on high-dose steroids for 8 months, and steroids are hard. But we've been able to do it together. And if this had happened at any other time, I don't know how things would have worked out for us. And
how long's it been since the chemo? That's all been within the last year?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, yeah, 2022, right?
So she finished
July of
chemotherapy in March of 2023, April of 2023. Yeah. And then she developed post-radiation pneumonitis. So just this past April, so less than a year ago is when she finished. And then she developed pneumonitis, which is a lung immune inflammation response to radiation. So she's had to be on steroids for that. So she was put on high-dose steroids and is just on the tail end of those now. She's still weaning off of that. So that's been 8 months or something since that.
Somewhere in this process and this experience together, there was an amazing, miraculous celebration and an event and an incredible, not ending, but, you know, part
beginning.
of the story. Beginning. Yeah, exactly. That's what makes this all so fascinating. Tell us about that. And at what point, where did that fit in?
I've been talking too much. You talk.
Well, so in December, the end of December is when we got the news about the cancer not being, like, with the surgery not being able to remove all of the cancer, that there are lymph nodes out. And that was a devastating day for me. And that evening, Elizabeth asked me to marry her. And so we kept it quiet, actually, for a long time. We didn't tell anybody. And it was really special to me because it was so intimate. So in August, at the end of August, we got married, and it was a great celebration. It was a wedding that both of us wanted. We got to do wear the dresses we wanted. We got to have the party that we wanted. And it was amazing. And did both families participate in everything? And
we felt so much support and love. We invited our families and then our supportive friends, and
we had people fly in from Texas and Montana and different places. That it was amazing.
And you didn't make anyone stay outside and wait until you came out.
No.
We had everything outside.
My
everything was outside.
My ex-husband was there. Holding the Rachael and
I was
Elizabeth
wondering who that was.
That's my ex-husband holding that sign of the picture I sent you. But our therapist, who's helped us through so much of this difficult time, She's actually located in Colorado, and I found her through Zen Care, and had been, I found her while I was in New Zealand. She's licensed in Utah, which is my residence, so she could do counseling. She flew out with her family, and she officiated the wedding for us. And
where was that at? Where was the wedding?
It was in Heber.
In Heber. It's beautiful setting. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah. Elisa Hancock, who is a post-Mormon, dear friend I've known for a really long time, has a son who's gay, and she left the church over the 2015 policy. She and her husband own a beautiful property up in the hills of Heber. And their son was getting married and around the same time. And so we had told her that we were engaged and going to get married. And she said, do you have a venue yet? You have to do it at our place where it's going to be great. And she had a vision, and she's amazing. And we helped her, but she just made it so beautiful and was so supportive, and really meant a lot to us. So it was a beautiful setting with people that we knew were supportive and loved us, with our therapist who had seen us through all of this. And then, we had a friend of mine, Colin, who grew up in my ward, and I was friends with his mom. She was one of my running friends. And I knew him since he was probably 5 or 6, but he was a gay kid that grew up in our ward, and, went through a lot being a gay kid in Elk Ridge. But he is an incredible drag performer, just the best dancer, performer. And she performed. His drag persona is Shade the Queen, and she performed for us at the wedding, and it was so much fun. It was so much fun. So we just had such a great wedding. So
that's amazing. And now you live in New Zealand.
Yes,
that's right.
We're here for a year.
Here for a year. That's incredible. Wow. This story, I mean, Landon, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just an incredible, inspiring story. And it was so heartbreaking as I was reading. And, I was reading your whole story, and then all of a sudden, and then she got cancer. And I'm like, oh, no, how can this happen? They've been this long, this struggle. And it was just heartbreaking. And then at the end, you had the pictures of your wedding. And that was just, it was such a beautiful setting. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the way I think most Mormons kind of that were married in the temple kind of say that have left or gone, I was kind of robbed of the choice to where and how I wanted, because a building isn't really, what I had in mind. I would have done something similar. The outdoor wedding, it was just beautiful. So it was just a wonderful story. And we knew we had to have you on after we read your story. So thank you for writing to us.
Exactly. Thank you so much for writing to us. And I think your story is just so powerful in terms of recognizing your authentic self eventually. I think a lot of post-Mormons, they don't even understand that was often not even an option for them, the way that they were raised. And then you come into your own. And then, of course, I think you described so beautifully the concerns about family and friends and community, and how are they going to react to you going to live your authentic life, really being you. And it's different for everybody, I think. But I think it's really powerful how you described it, and And you took that chance, you took that risk, you were true to yourself, and everybody loves you. That's the bottom line.
The
As
family
long as there's
reaction,
love.
that love from their
Yeah,
family
there's
was just
love.
so, because so
Yeah.
many who leave get rejected by their family.
Mhm.
Right.
And you seem to be
Yeah.
embraced by them, and
Mhm.
that's a beautiful thing to show.
Yeah.
Yeah, we love it.
I've been really blessed to have family support, and it's just meant everything. I'm happier now than I've ever felt in my entire life. I feel fulfilled and at peace and authentic, and just like there's so much love and happiness to be had in the world. So
Oh, I love that.
that's
And I think that's
cheesy,
a
but
perfect.
but it's
It's
really
not
how I
though.
feel.
It's not. No, that's a perfect note to end on. And I wish we didn't have to end. I wish we could go Mormon stories length. Don't you, Landon?
Oh yeah, no.
Someday we'll do
No,
it like
I don't want to
5
go
more
that
hours.
long.
I don't know. I think I would have to take a bathroom break.
Yeah,
and
I was gonna
I don't know
say,
how he does it. Honestly, I do not know how he does it.
I don't have the bladder for Mormon stories.
I don't have the bladder for a
Yeah,
Mormon
me
story
neither.
podcast. So, no, this was just perfect. And I just really want to thank you guys for being so authentic and honest and open and coming out and sharing this story. And I know that you had checked with family members ahead of time, to say, are you okay if we talk about this? Because it's a whole big story involving everyone that loves you in your life and that you care about. But I think it's really important. And so I hope that our listeners and viewers, I hope that you will comment and let us know what you thought about this beautiful story, the story of Rachael and Elizabeth, and let us know your thoughts and feelings. Have you had similar experiences? Have you struggled with getting in touch with your authentic self, and what has that meant? Have there been losses along the way? Have there been gains? It's just a big picture that a lot of people on the other side of Mormonism, choosing a different path, we wrestle with. And it's wonderful to hear a story like this, which wasn't a perfect story, right? There were trials, tribulation, there were things you went through together, there were decisions, there were tears, but here you are, this amazing, beautiful couple that we're just so thankful that you came on to Mormonish with us. So all right, everybody.
Thanks
well,
for
please,
having us.
yeah, please like and subscribe. And if you'd like to be made aware of when our new episodes come out, you can hit that notification bell and you will get a notice letting you know that a new episode has dropped. And if you would like to support Mormonish Podcast, there are always links in the show notes to donate through Venmo or through PayPal. And we certainly do love and appreciate everybody that does help support the podcast and our mission going forward. So that being said, just thank you so much, everybody. Thanks, Landon. Thanks, Rachael. Thanks, Elizabeth. And we'll sign off for now from Mormonish. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.